Oxford or Bollywood? I mean, the Hindi film industry. What's
Well,
tougher?
where would I want to get a degree from? Oxford. But I think that Oxford prepared me for Bollywood because I studied history as well. You know, it's a lot about storytelling, research, learning lines. And I don't think I'd had a drop of alcohol before I went to England. So neither did I have that sort of liquid courage to help me through Freshers Week, which I suspect Freshers Week is a nightmare for everyone. But some people looked quite happy. And then you go to your room, which was built in the 12th century and has escaped any kind of renovation since. You know, there's one window way up, like close to the ceiling. I had to climb on top of my desk to be able to peek out. And my view was of it was like the Martyrs' Memorial, where I think there were some Protestants burnt at the stake. And I was like, oh, this is a lovely view. And it's very positive vibes. 10 years ago, there would be no future for someone like me in cinema, unless you're the heroine or you're the mother of the hero. They really didn't know what to do with you in your 40s. Now I'm seeing myself being represented on screen. These are all good things. I do feel somewhere, though, that, you know, when things like Netflix and Amazon came in, there was a lot of hope. Now I feel like...
Welcome to another episode of Quizzitalk, whose tagline could well be Learning and Life Lessons Unplugged. Today we have with us someone who personifies a quite unique blend of royal and cinema legacy, intellect and creativity. Actress, author, quiz host and modern-day princess, Soha Ali Khan. Hi Soha, how are you doing?
Hello. Very good, thank you. It's so nice to be on this show with you, Babu.
Thank you so much for joining us from the quite warm and reasonable temperatures of Mumbai, with us sitting in Delhi with a minimum of 7 degrees temperature, and it's smoggy outside. So, you know, however, we count our blessings, and I'm delighted that you're on the other side.
No, I'm so happy that we can do this, and I haven't seen you for a very long time. So it's nice to see you, even if it's only virtually.
Likewise, a real pleasure, Soha. Always we track you in your movies, in your work, in your writing from time to time, and of course on all the coverage in the papers and the magazines. Last, all over the pages on your mother's 80th, I believe. Is that right?
Yes, it was a landmark birthday celebration, and we weren't sure how to celebrate it. She wanted to go somewhere a little warmer than Delhi is right now. So we managed to do the impossible and get almost everyone together from the immediate family, and we went to Goa. And we spent a lovely weekend. And she was very happy. And in fact, everyone else. And it's quite difficult to please every single member of my family. But everyone came out of it content. And I think that's a huge achievement because I was the party planner.
Fantastic. That's quite an achievement, Soha. Now, for the viewers, Soha's journey is taken up from the princely corridors of the Pataudi and Bhopal households to Oxford University and the London School of Economics, to the big screen, and even to hosting quiz shows that brought learning and fun into Indian homes. Whether it's her books, movies or TV shows, she's always embodied the power of education, knowledge and culture. So once again, it's really good to have you here.
Thank you. And I really miss our times together because all the things that I have hosted in terms of quiz shows and game shows have been with you.
Yeah, indeed. So to kick things off, let's do a quick rapid fire round to get to know you better.
Oh God, already? Don't we warm up?
Yeah, well, we'll put you there, and I think this is to warm you up. This is to get things going. All right?
Okay. Okay, but I'm very bad at rapid fire, I'll just tell you now.
No, but you know what's on top of your mind, so you should be able to say it right off.
I don't know if I should always say what's on the top of my mind, but I'll do my best.
Give it a shot.
Okay.
So, Ali Khan, we'll start your time now. Your favorite subject in school?
History, modern history, like 20th century world history.
Oxford or Bollywood? I mean, the Hindi film industry. What's
What do
tougher?
you mean? Like, where would I want to get a degree from? Oxford.
Yes.
But I think that Oxford prepared me for Bollywood because I studied history as well. You know, it's a lot about storytelling, research, learning lines. working on memory retention. I've used all of those skills. A lot of people feel that you don't need to have gone to college to be an actor. But I feel like it really prepared me for Bollywood. And I don't want to choose Oxford and Bollywood, academia and working in films.
Yeah, and you have that rare distinction of being possibly the only person or one of the very few people who's been to Oxford and is in the Hindi film industry.
Yes, I'm holding on to that. That's my one achievement that I'm holding on to. Also, one of the rare people in my family who has like a proper university degree. My father did read at Oxford, but I don't think he really did any exams.
He played cricket and with great distinction for Oxford. He was an Oxford Blue, and what a blue.
His course was in modern languages. So he was also supposed to turn up and do some exams in Arabic and some other language.
But he didn't complete the degree and you did.
I did.
Noted. What did your mother tell you to watch out for in filmdom?
She said, do whatever you want, but never marry an actor. She said, please don't marry an actor. You'll be hugely complicating your life. They have huge egos and their mood swings will go up and down, not only with their own success, but with everybody else's success. And, actors are sensitive. So I think you, as a partner to an actor, have to be a certain way. And I think I am that certain way.
Yeah, so you did precisely what she advised you not to do. And you married Kunal Khemu, who was very much an actor.
Yeah.
And presumably, Tiger Pataudi didn't have mood swings like that?
I actually, in my experience, because as a child, you have a different relationship with a parent as a husband and wife. And often we are far better behaved with our children than we are with our spouses. So I think perhaps I got the best of him. And he was as cool as a cucumber. I honestly never ever heard him raise his voice in my whole entire life. He never really got angry with us. He was firm and he was strict and he didn't need to raise his voice. Unlike my mother. So I feel like, she, on the other hand, had a few sensitive moments.
I can imagine. And you do too?
I am a lot like my father. Genetically, I think in our DNA makeup, it takes a lot to push me over the edge. And somehow, Kunal just knows exactly which buttons to press. He's the only one who infuriates me. Nobody else, not even my 7-year-old daughter.
And I thought he'd be cool as a cucumber, like your dad.
Yeah, not at all. So maybe there's some truth to this whole acting business. You wear your emotions on your sleeve and, you share your stress with the world. And then he is very happy afterwards. But all of us are sort of left quaking in the aftermath of his mood swings.
Right. Switching subjects. Best quiz moment you've had or you can remember?
There's so many, but I just remember the whole experience of being on Spell Bee, and I was so nervous all the time because they're such young children and they have to spell such difficult words. And I remember there was one word, I don't even think I can say it right now, but it was impossible to pronounce, and I was struggling with pronouncing it. And I think it was called pneumono-ultramicroscopic something. You might know. Silicovolcaniosis. It's like some lung disease, and I'm pretty sure they made up this word. But as I was saying it, this person managed to spell it, without like pen or paper, and it was like, I was just hugely impressed.
There are different species, the Spell Bee gang. Both the ones who were in the States, and when we collaborated for 3 years doing Spell Bee here in India, I remember those kids, they were made of some different kind of cloth.
Absolutely.
And they're prepped.
Completely. And they're prepped, and you couldn't, I think I referred to one of them. I said, and it's so nice to meet you kids. And one of them, who was the youngest, contestant, said, I would like to interrupt you and say, we are not kids. Kids are the prodigies of goats. We are children. And I said, oh, so sorry. That's be told.
Right. So if you could bring one historical figure to dinner, who would that be?
Oh, God. Am I allowed to say my father?
Sure.
Because I feel...
He's history and he's a legend.
I think so. Number one, I would love to have dinner with him. And B, I think that there is so much history, and he really saw so much change in his life, from becoming the Nawab of Patodi to Mr. Khan, the loss of privy purses and princely titles, the loss of his eye, the loss of his father at the age of 11. He had so much life experience in him. And I'm not sure I got all of it. So I would like another meal, please.
That is one dinner to be prepared for and to wish for. I'm sure that would be wonderful. So let's slow things down a little bit now and start at the beginning in a more paced out way with your roots. You've often spoken about how the term princess doesn't quite define your childhood, despite your royal lineage or being a star daughter for that matter. Can you share a glimpse of what growing up with a cinema icon as your mother in the illustrious Pataudi household and being a descendant of the Bhopal royal family was like?
I think that it was, for me, actually quite quote-unquote normal, but I understand normal is a very subjective word. I'm aware of the fact that I grew up in the lap of luxury. We lived in a beautiful house in Delhi, opposite Sena Bhavan, which then I realized 20 years later, we shouldn't have got too comfortable in because it was taken away from us. Like a lot of things, in my father's time. But I grew up in that house. And we had a lot of things that I'm sure a lot of other people don't. But as a child, I don't think you really take note of how much privilege you have. And I, of course, went to a school in Delhi called the British School in Chanakyapuri, where there were people of similar backgrounds. In fact, far more wealthier than our family, because a lot of people who may know about princes in India may know that they may have a lot of tradition and a lot of fine clothes and some land, but not a lot of cash. So we, at least my father, gave us the impression that we had none, because he was most concerned with the cost of petrol and electricity. We had one telephone. In those times. There were no mobile phones, of course. So we had one telephone landline with a huge extension cord that you had to follow the cord to see who had the phone. And it was more often than not my sister, locked in her room. And then you would get the phone for some time. But my father would sit on top of that phone all day long. And at night, when he went to bed, he would lock the phone. So there was like one of those talas, and he would lock it so we couldn't call our friends. And he would leave post-it notes all over the house saying, turn off the lights, turn off the lights. If I wanted to go to a friend's house, he would say, no, Priyanka lives in Greater Kailash, and petrol is very expensive. So we were very aware of the value of money. In fact, when somebody gave me 500 rupees, I remember, he said, you can either have this 500 rupees now, or this was in August, I don't know which year. He said, you can give it to me, and I will give you 50 rupees every August for the rest of my life. And I said, I would rather have the 500 rupees, I think. But I do remember giving it to him. And he did. Till I was, about 25 years old, he gave me 50 rupees every August. And that was a lesson in sort of investment and savings and things that I remember today. So he made us aware, I think because he lost so much in life. He didn't take anything for granted. He also didn't really have a professional income. I think so. I think money was something that he didn't take for granted. So I was aware of the cost of my education. I was aware of the cost of living. Again, when he went shopping, for example, if it was on his list to buy a pair of socks, that's exactly what he did. He bought one pair of socks. Unlike the rest of us who get distracted and buy like a number of things and forget what it is that we went into the shop for. So I think a lot of us were grown up with these sort of very basic, grounded values I attribute to him, including my mother. I think she's always been someone who does hisab kitab. My memories of her, even I don't live with her now, after lunch, she sits with the cook at home and they do hisab kitab with a big khata and a pen, and, she knows tomato ka bhav kitna hai. She knows all of this. So we were grown up. I mean, I understand that there was privilege, but yet there was a sense of normalcy. And I don't think I was spoiled, but I did enjoy being a princess. I do think that as a young girl, the fact that I was a princess, and I'm told that the first time I had a blood test and I saw that the color of my blood was red, I was very disappointed.
It wasn't blue.
Yes, I was like, what is this? What do you mean? How's my blood red and such a common red color? So I was most disappointed.
So, yeah. But you did know that that was part of your legacy. And even though you didn't wear a tiara at all times of the day and night, and even though that was way before IPL came about and cricketers, even after a few matches, sort of, have palaces of their own, looks like. It's a little bit like that. This was before all of that. So that, apart from his exceptional capabilities and reputation and feats on the cricket field, was personified a kind of prudence and a kind of, cautiousness. And you grew up in that atmosphere. And obviously, education meant something to you too, and higher learning, because you have a degree from Balliol at Oxford and and higher degree from the London School of Economics. Tell us about that. How did that happen?
I think that, there has to be an amount of self-motivation, I think, when it comes to wanting to pursue studies or pursue any talent beyond a point. At some point, I did realize that I would be a third generation, Oxford graduate if I went, but I would...
Yes, your grandfather was there too.
Yes.
He played for Oxford too.
Was there. Yes, he did.
Yeah.
So my grandfather read there, my father read there. But we went to such a small school. Nobody had applied to Oxford, even from the British school before me. So it was not really something that the school was even prepped to do. And I think I was applying. We wanted to study in England. And my father said, you should apply. And I said, I don't know if I, am capable of going there. You have this impression of people at Oxford who are, sort of very pale-faced and wearing thick glasses and, never seen the sunlight and obviously very, very smart. And I didn't know if I was suitable to be in that company, et cetera, et cetera. But I did apply, and my offer was, I remember, 2 A's and a B. I was good in school. I was academically very sound, and I enjoyed research and writing. The subjects that I was drawn to were all the arts, whether it was literature or history, some economics. And I really enjoyed reading and researching and writing. I kept diaries. I think my history notes are used even today in school. They were very good. They were very good notes. And it was one of the proudest moments of my life, I think, when I went to school. And I remember that principal, Mrs. Prabhu, she gave me the letter. And, she said, is it Oxford or not? Have you got in? And I remember opening that letter. And, I think it's almost like a blurry vision, but I saw 3 A's. And I called my father immediately. And he was so thrilled and very proud of the fact that I'd got in, because I think the experience, more than the degree, the experience of going to an institution like that and being exposed to the buildings, the people. Normally you go to a college and you read great books. But here I had a chance to go to a college and sit with the authors of those books. The leading thinkers of the subjects. And that I knew was something that I wanted to experience and to treasure. And it's one of those life-changing things, really.
And I believe that the system at Oxford is that it goes by tutorials. So you have tutors that you work very closely with, and not necessarily just attending classes with a whole lot of people and listening to lectures, one class after the other. You have to do a lot of reading on your own and prep, and then it's those one-to-one, virtually, mostly one-to-one sessions with tutors, which is the main sort of, how should I say, pedagogy, which happens there. Is that correct? Tell us about that experience. What was it like? Were you starstruck by, the kind of people who'd been to that institution, or by the kind of people you were dealing with? And what was it like being there? Was it super plush? What was it like?
Well, firstly, just the application process. I was very happy that as an international student, I escaped having to do the interview, which people get very nervous about. I had to get 2 A's and a B. So on the basis of your exams, you get selected. For a lot of people, they do the interview, which I think now everyone might do. And on the basis of that interaction, you may or may not get selected. And then there was the all-famous application essay, the one-word essay, where they ask you to write 3,000 words on one word. So what is courage, for example? And I remember the big myth when we were there. I don't know if it's true or not, or it's one of those urban legends, but the question that one Oxford applicant was given was, what is courage? And you're supposed to write 3,000 words. And he wrote, this is. And that's it. And I don't know whether he got in or not, but everyone was like, wow, that's so cool, that's so brave. But I don't know if someone would have risked their whole education on being so cocky. But everyone is like, oh, this essay. So I didn't have to do that. I just had to do my application, which in fact was on, I remember it was on Babur and Mughal sort of history. And my father also read it and approved of it. And I got my marks and I got in. Once you get there, you realize, like the educational system in England, it is again very self-driven. You don't get marked on a weekly or a monthly or even an annual basis. You have one exam at the end of your first year, which are your prelims. That determines whether you stay on or not. At the end of your first year, if you do stay on, there's nothing till your final exams at the end of your third year. So really, you could just spend those 2 years doing nothing. You know, you can go on holiday all over Europe and you can go to nightclubs and you could, join societies and have fun, play cricket or do whatever your passions are. And nobody will check up on you until you sit your exams. And then it's on you whether you do well or not. What you do every week is you get a very comprehensive list of books and essays that you have to go to the library and source and find and read, absorb, organize, prioritize, analyze, put together a 3,000-word essay, and then between 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock for me on Thursday, I would go and have my one-on-one with my professor. And you have no escape there. It's not like you can hide in the back or not put up your hand. All the questions are addressed to you. You read out your essay, and then you have a conversation, at the end of which you don't get a mark. So you don't know where you stand in relation to anyone else in your class. You just get comments, detailed comments on how you can improve yourself. So you know where you stand compared to yourself, but not A, B, C, D at all. And that has its advantages and disadvantages. I think that you need to know what kind of person you are and what kind of educational system you would flourish in, or if you need more guidance or not. I felt like this was good for me. And I, as I said, have always been self-motivated. So it worked for me. But the second year is very tricky because there are no exams at the end of your second year. And I did have lots of fun as well.
Good.
And then, of
yeah,
course,
that's what they say.
You might
Sorry,
know
I
at
said
the
that's what
end-
they say, that there in Oxbridge, you work hard, but you can also party very hard. Some do only one or the other, but you manage the balance of both.
I think I've been, that Libran in me is constantly in a state or trying to be in a state of balance. So I did have that. And at the end, when you do your exams, not only do you have to, sit your exams and remember and regurgitate facts and essays and thoughts, but you also have to make sure you're wearing the right color flower in your buttonhole. Because you have to, in your first exam, you have to wear a white carnation. For the rest of your exams, you have to wear a pink carnation. And for your last exam, you have to find a red carnation. So forget about learning. Last minute, you're going around looking for flowers in the right color. And where's my mortarboard? Where's my black ribbon? Where are my black stockings? Because there's a full sub-fusk outfit that you have to wear for every exam. And if you don't, then they fine you £50 or £100 or something.
My God, that's a lot to do just for the sake of competition. And the dress code for exams. And I can imagine you running around for your sub-fusks and your right kind of flower to put in your buttonhole.
And then when you finish your exams and you come out, and your last exam, you think, oh, there's going to be people clapping for you and saying, oh, well done. But they have a tradition where they throw flour and eggs and like all kinds of things that you would normally bake a cake with are thrown at you as you exit your exam hall. That's also a tradition. It's very cute.
Fun. That's crazy. But obviously, you took your academics pretty seriously. What subject did you do there, incidentally?
I did modern history.
Okay. All right.
So you have to choose a little medieval history. So I think I did a little bit of 12th century history. Modern for them is anything post 235 AD. That's modern.
And not just the last few hundred years.
No.
Okay. So that's what it was. But you also had fun.
I did.
Tell us a little bit about that and tell us what it was actually like staying at college in those, at residence, in those rooms. What was it like?
So, firstly, staying there, I have to cast my mind back, but I was terrified because I was from a very protected background, lived at home, of course, my whole life, never went to boarding school, went to a very small school where there were only 15 people in my class. I'd been there from 1984 to 1996. I'd never had to make friends, for such a long time. And youngest person in my family of 3, siblings. And suddenly I was sort of thrust into this foreign world. And even though it's an English-speaking world, it's a very foreign culture. And I was terrified. My parents came to drop me off. And I have this visual in my mind of them dropping me to my room and then going away. And that visual of that car driving away and, the wheels kicking up the dust and my parents leaving. And I just felt, oh God, this is where I'm really on my own for the first time. And it's an opportunity also to, I think if you have had a protected childhood, to really discover who you are for the first time, where nobody asks you, like, you have to make friends. Sometimes, as most people, I think, in college, the friends you make for the first 2 weeks, you end up for the rest of the 3 years trying to lose them because you made the wrong friends. And you're like, no, this was just a very bad mistake. We're not meant to be friends. So that also happens. There's a huge drinking culture in England. And I don't think I'd had a drop of alcohol before I went to England. So neither did I have that sort of liquid courage to help me through Freshers' Week, which I suspect Freshers' Week is a nightmare for everyone. But some people looked quite happy. And then you go to your room, which was built in the 12th century and has escaped any kind of renovation since. There's one window way up, like close to the ceiling. I had to climb on top of my desk to be able to peek out. And my view was of it was like the Martyrs' Memorial, where I think there were some Protestants burnt at the stake. And I was like, oh, this is a lovely view. And very positive vibes. And a stone bed, a stone floor, a sink with 2 taps, one with scalding water, one with freezing water. So it's impossible to get the temperature correct. One thin wardrobe and a little electric heater. You don't share a room. You're by yourself. And then you just sort of lie there. It's October, November, freezing. The sun doesn't come out for, barring a couple of hours. When I was feeling very miserable. They have dinner at 6:30. I was like, what is this? Nobody has dinner at 6:30. I'm not even hungry. Making friends. But then you do make friends and, you find people. And not everybody is pale-faced and wearing thick glasses. There are people who are, wearing leather jackets and very cool. And some people who don't need to study but naturally get distinctions. And, you meet all kinds of people. And you find so Tom and Charlotte Charlotte lived opposite me. Tom was my travel companion through my 3 years. We're still friends today. And they were my sort of support group. And helped me through a lot, dietary changes, things like that. I think for the first year, I just had Twix and Coke as food.
Sounds very healthy.
It was really not it was a diet rich in processed food. And then I had to call home and ask for some isabgol or something to help me through. But, I really came into my own. I understood what kind of music I like, what kind of food I like. What are things that I'm good at, things I need to work on. I became an ambassador for my country as well because people asked me so many questions about India. I didn't have all the answers, so I said, I should know some of this. Really taking public transport, learning how to operate a bank account, riding a bicycle. These are things that I didn't learn growing up, and I learned at the age of 18, which is quite late. But for me, my Oxford education encapsulated all these things, not just learning about history.
Sounds really memorable, fruitful, and an education for life, which was exceptional. And, just as hard as it was to get in for you, I'm sure they too treasured having a third-generation Oxonian there. Iftikhar Ali Khan Pataudi was a legend. He played for both England and India. And that's something that they would have up there, of course, in Oxford Blue, and then your father, Mansoor Ali Khan Pataudi, and then Soh Ali Khan Pataudi. So 3 generations of very distinct and distinctive people on their annals. That should have been good. From there, you decided to study further. And you went to the London School of Economics. Tell us about that. What happened?
I really enjoyed academia. I didn't want to do a PhD, but I wasn't ready to stop learning and spending, all my hours learning. I really enjoyed, and you're in such a protected environment at Oxford. You don't see a newspaper also sometimes. You forget what's happening in the real world, especially when you're studying a subject like history. And I think when I came out, I wasn't ready to get a job, and I wasn't sure what it is that I wanted to do. I did work at the Ford Foundation for 1 year, which is an American NGO in New Delhi. And I think I worked in international human rights, and it's sort of where it's a grant-making organization where you give grants to people working in various fields like democracy or human rights and things like that. I enjoyed that very much. And then I wanted to further my research from history into a more contemporary space and learn about international relations, which is misquoted by the Indian media all the time as international relationships. It's not guided by postgraduate degree in. That means something else entirely. But,
So the relationships between nations and governments and,
yes.
And all of that. And I think it has to do with, who's going off with whom.
Just having boyfriends from Australia and America or something like that. Oh.
And get a degree from that in that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Today there's learning all kinds of things. But I did want to learn that. And again, it's in England, everything is a little more compressed. So you only do it for a year. So I think I was done in one academic year. Also a fascinating subject and something that I think that, I'm still interested in today. What I think I learned was just the ability to concentrate when you have to go through masses of information, read a number of books, learn how to read, how to, as I said, organize your data, prioritize what's important, come to the right conclusions, form some kind of thesis, think, and try to sort of be creative. The idea is not to regurgitate what is already out there, but try to give your own spin on something. So I found all of that was really empowering for me in certain ways. Helps me today, even these skills, I think. I think my sense of organization, my sense of being a sort of analytical tools that you learn, those are things that are still with me today. And then I was back in India after that.
Right. Because after that, what we know is that then Filmdon beckoned. And there you were, entering into films. Is that something that you thought of? How did that happen?
Oh, I'd not thought of it at all. I'd been very dismissive of films. I'd seen my mother, of course, go to work because she, continues. Even last year, she had 2 releases. This year, sorry, I mean. And so I've seen her go to work. I've watched a lot of films growing up, but I was very much my father's daughter. And so we watched Guns of Navarone and 39 Steps, and those were his favorite films. And he didn't watch a lot of Hindi movies growing up. So as a result, we didn't watch a lot of Hindi cinema growing up until I joined films. And I thought, it's a lot of singing and dancing and, this whole, especially the 90s, a lot of changing outfits and bizarre breaking into song and very regressive in certain ways. And this is not something that I want to do. And my parents were very happy. They'd invested heavily in my education and they wanted me to do something else. And I did. I was a banker with Citigroup in their Citigroup private bank for a grand total of 13 months. I did not enjoy it. They were working on my transfer to England. And that's when I was offered my first film. It was offered by Amol Palekar, actually. He was going to direct it. So a very, well-respected name, something that is a little artistic and not so commercial. He wanted to launch me. He wanted to launch another actor.
That was Paheli, if I'm not wrong.
That was Paheli.
But finally, it didn't happen for you.
Well, I mean, if you've seen it, I'm not in it.
No, you're not Rani Mukherjee.
I'm really not in it. So what went wrong? I realized that you should not quit your well-paid corporate job. If someone just offers you a film, there has to be a contract. There has to be a signing amount. These things have come into play now. I think even when I joined films, it wasn't so corporatized. People, and I just thought, okay, I'm doing this film. I'm going to quit my job. I'm not going to tell my parents because I don't think they're going to approve. So why tell them something that they're not going to approve of? Let's just put that off for now. And so I didn't tell them. And they found out 3 months later when I was jobless and I was paying 17,000 rupees rent for, a flat in Lokhandwala, and I had no income, and they were not amused at all. So my advice to everyone out there is that, tell your parents what you're doing, especially when it comes to life-altering decisions. They can be good guides for you. And number 2, until you have that signing amount and a contract, don't quit your job.
Tell me, I can imagine, what it must have felt like then to sort of, think that that's going to be your launch, give up a job, and then the plug gets pulled for all sorts of compulsions and all sorts of real world reasons. But then as far as your parents are concerned, your mother's being part of cinema, not just Hindi film industry, Bengali cinema.
Yes.
That's where she began and has done outstanding roles over there, and knew that too. And she knew what it was like to be an actor. She too was taken aback. She didn't expect you to have that interest at all.
No,
What
but
happened
I'm quite, I think that growing up, I perhaps didn't let on too much. My mother said at some point, your handwriting has changed. It's become very small. And that means you've become secretive. And I was like, really? I don't think so. I think I've just become lazy. But she said, no, you're keeping things from me. And in those days, we used to write to each other. So even when I was at Oxford, we used to get long, long letters. And I used to write long, long letters. Gone are those days now. But, so she used to analyze my handwriting. And I think, to be fair to her, I didn't let anyone think that. And even when I went to England, even when I went to Mumbai to stay with my brother who was working in films, my mother said to him, that you cannot, like if she joins films, it'll be your fault because you would have filled her head with all kinds of things. So don't do that. And I managed to spend a couple of holidays with him and not be influenced. But there is something, I did enjoy theatre. I always enjoyed acting. I did theatre in college, in school. We did Streetcar Named Desire, and I played Blanche the Bois, and I think I did a good job. And I think I enjoyed acting. My mother told me when I was young, and I was scolded by her, never by my father, as I told you earlier. But when she used to scold us, I used to immediately run to the bathroom to watch my eyes well up with tears. And I enjoyed, just emoting in front of the mirror. So I think there was a part of me that realized my whole family is in films, barring one or two people. And I should perhaps try and carve my identity somewhere else. Because a lot of people, will think I'm taking the easy route. And maybe I will be not as good as them. And that will be difficult for me or for others. It may not be the right career choice. And that's why I think I shied away from it. But when I was offered this opportunity, and honestly, because Paheli is also it was this sort of folklore, Rajasthani, princely tale, it appealed to me as who I was growing up, as well as the historian in me. And so I think that's why I thought I wanted to do that. I ended up doing a small Bengali film as my first film called Iti Srikanto. And I think that was the perfect place to start. I thought, let me start in a small way where nobody will even really notice that I'm doing this. And if I enjoy the experience, then I will do more. And I've really gone from film to film or show to show from then, thinking that, whenever I don't want to, I won't. And whenever I do want to, I will.
You said you began with Iti Srikanto, a Bangla movie. So do you have passable Bangla? You've done a reasonable amount of Bangla movies too?
I've done 2 Bengali movies. In both of them, thankfully, I was quite mute. So in one, though, I was pretty much mute throughout. And in the second one, I was playing the character of Choti Bahu in Rituparna, like a wonderful film. But in fact, everyone there was Jackie Shroff, there was Abhishek Bachchan, there was myself. None of us are Bangla speaking. And then there was Rupa Ganguly, who sort of saved us all. But Jackie Shroff had a long mustache and someone dubbed for him. And every time he spoke, he sort of brought a cat into frame and then took the cat out of frame. I was just weeping most of the time and had a few lines where I would learn my lines. But then once I was lazy and I thought I'll write my lines and I'll keep them, in a close-up, just out of frame. And, I'll look here and look there and I'll just read my lines. And I put them there. And then suddenly Ritu Das said, I want you to cry in this scene. So I said, oh, that I can do. I've always been able to cry, on demand. So I produced these tears and he said, lovely, lovely, shoot. And then I tried to read my lines and I couldn't because they were all blurry. So I said, oh no, wait, I haven't thought this through. Now I need 10 minutes to go and actually learn my lines. So I went and learned them. I blame my mother because Bangla is my mother tongue. And everyone says, oh, it's such a mishti language. But the only time I heard my mother speak Bengali was when either she was doing Hisab Kitab or when she was disciplining.
Scolding you.
Yes. And so for me, it was not the most mishti language. And we were not really, so we didn't really take to it.
All right. And then in Bombay, Mumbai, You started off with movies like Rang De Basanti, and then there was that film with Sudhir made, Khoya Khoya Chand, I believe.
Yes.
Right? And where you played the central character, and it was a biopic, and, was very demanding. Both those movies were quite exceptional in different ways. What was that like, and what's your experience in the Bombay film industry been like? If you can bridge those points.
It has been good, I think. I think it is very difficult to try and sort of judge my experience or even comment on my experience, because there's now so much talk of insider, outsider, nepotism, this, that. So you have to be very aware. And I think I am, and I always have been, even if I hadn't worked in films, I think I've been hugely aware just because of India and the variety of people in India from a variety of income groups, a variety of places, variety of educational backgrounds, that I'm definitely hugely privileged in so many different ways. If I just think about my own family, I know I'm digressing right now, but if I think about the fact that I think my paternal great-grandmother, got married at the age of 9 and had children at the age of 13. If I think of my own maternal grandmother, she had to fight with her family to get an MA. She wanted to do a master's degree. And at that point, women in the early 20th century really were not encouraged to pursue tertiary education. And she went to stay with her uncle in Allahabad. And he said, all right, you can. But I think her birthday was coming up and she was given a choice between a Banarasi sari for 50 rupees, and the cost of the MA at that point was also 50 rupees. And she said, I would rather do the MA. She was not allowed to go physically, but she did sort of remotely.
Distance education.
And yeah, co-education at that point was not going to happen. But she did distance education. There was no electricity, so she would study by candlelight. And, she was the first person, really, in the family to get her MA and, in a broader way to get an MA from Bengal. And so education has been important through the family from both sides, my father's side and my mother's side. I've forgotten your question, though, and how that became relevant. But I think privilege, yes. The fact that I could choose that I wanted to study, I could choose, even though my mother said, don't marry an actor. I did choose to marry an actor. I did choose to pursue my education. I did choose to join films. So I've had choices my whole life. And just having choices is something that sets me apart from many people in this country. So I'm aware of that. So to comment on my experience, I think that I had opportunities. I met lots of directors. I don't think, I'm not the right person to say. I would like to say that, I don't think I've received unfair treatment or like a leg up in any way. I'm not the right person to say that. But I feel like I feel like I haven't done as much work as I would have liked to, work with a bunch of directors that I would have liked to. I didn't really have my mother or my father or my brother or my, sister-in-law, hold my hand or take me places or say, you should work with her. We don't see each other in each other's movies or at each other's film premieres. We're not that family. So I feel like whatever I've done and experienced has been perhaps because of my own connections with people, my own work, my own hard work, some talent, things like that. It's not a glittering career, but I really feel like films has been an integral part of my life, but a part of my life. There's so much else that goes into making my life truly wonderful and complete in so many ways. And films has been a part of that. Yes.
The title of your book, it's a biographical book and is, actually typifies your attitude and the kind of person you are. The perils of being moderately famous. So it's a very sort of objective way to look at yourself. And not many people have that ability, apart from the humor and the wit that is obviously there, that, you've written about it like that. And that book is such a candid account. It's so readable. It's a delight. Just the other day I reread it on a flight to Chennai and I was chuckling throughout around me, wondering what is going on over here. And my sister grabbed the book and said, I'm not letting you take it back. I'm going to keep it with me, because it is such fun, and what it is about. But, you've had a very realistic view of what's been going on there in the Bombay film industry. But I was just asking for your take on what you think is happening apart from your own career, what's happening in the films. What could we or should we be doing, and what is happening which is encouraging, and what should people be doing?
Ooh. It's a whole different podcast, I think. But
Okay.
I will try. I think
Think of it as a rapid fire question.
Yeah,
Put
okay.
in a few snappy kind of takes.
I'll try. The fact that we have choices is always a good thing. Now we can choose to go to the cinema or watch something from the comfort of our own homes, and a lot of people are choosing to watch from the comfort of their own homes. I'm not a producer as yet, so I'm not thinking about it from the business point of view. I'm only thinking about it as an artist. My goal is to work, to have more opportunities to work, and I would like as many people to be able to see my work, whether it's in the cinema or at home. A lot of people are watching content on their smartphones now as well. So I think everyone now has the ability to be a filmmaker if you have a story to tell, and to distribute their content in affordable ways. And you can also consume that content in more affordable ways now. These are all good things. I do feel somewhere, though, that when things like Netflix and Amazon came in, there was a lot of hope. Now I feel like perhaps even big platforms somewhere are not, they are struggling in some ways to appropriately budget their movies, appropriately cast their movies and shows. And somewhere there's a correction that is happening in the industry. And I feel that. So I think that, now when it comes to the cinema, people will always go and watch like the big blockbuster films with the huge star casts and actors. But there's a lot of employment for people who at some point were doing the medium budget films, people like me. And there's opportunities like as a woman in her 40s, I know that the future exists. 10 years ago, there would be no future for someone like me in cinema, unless you're the heroine or you're the mother of the hero. They really didn't know what to do with you in your 40s. Now I'm seeing myself being represented on screen, actors my age, female actors, playing central characters in shows, in movies. So I'm very, very happy. I don't feel panicked that, if I take a year off, like I took 3 years off when I became a mother, I don't feel that sense of panic that, when I go back, there'll be nothing there.
Soha, there is this huge churning. I'm aware of it in our cinema, on television, on online platforms. It's a crunch of resources and how to use them judiciously.
I feel like where there's authenticity, where you have a story, of course, you need backing for that story. But the idea is to be authentic, I think. And that exists, and that also does not exist in the industry.
So, your talent, I've had first-hand experience of from the 2 times we worked together on 2 very different kinds of shows. Both happened to be quiz or game shows, or quiz game shows, let's put it like that. One was Khelo Jeeto Jio, which was in Hindi, and where people could play, pairs could play, and they could win a flat out of that, and a whole lot of Godrej products, who not many people know, work from everything from space exploration to furniture to sort of confectionaries and all sorts of things in between. So that was something that and you did it with quite a lot of poise at that time. I remember it was quite an experience. And then you did Spelby, where I think you were an absolutely ideal host. Poised, a great pronouncer, and with the kind of humor which the Tower people in the United States don't have on their Spelby, and I think you connected with the contestants, brought them out, but also the wonder of the language and the peculiarities, if you like, and some of the logic of its spelling. What was that experience like for you?
I think I was definitely more in my natural habitat for Spelby than Khelo Jeeto Jio, because I think Khelo Jeeto Jio happened post Rang De, and it was this prime time show in Hindi, and I was terrified because you have to really think on your feet, and because you are sort of quizzing people, a lot depends on how you say, when you say it. You don't want to give away too much. It's real time, and you have to think on your feet in Hindi. And I don't think I could have done it without you. This was my first experience being, a quiz master of sorts, being a host, being an anchor, doing things like that. And really, I could, as I said, I couldn't have done it without you. I really enjoyed doing it. It was a very lucrative thing for me to do at that time. And at the end of the day, I think I had fun. Once I relaxed, once I understood how things happen. But I remember the first couple of episodes being very stressful for me, and perhaps making mistakes as well. I think I remember I made a couple of mistakes where contestants were also correcting me, which is mortifying. And then Spell Bee came, later. And that I felt more at ease with. Of course, there were times when I was challenged as well. There were words that I'd never heard of. And here I have to pronounce them correctly, because if I don't pronounce them correctly, that could impact a contestant's ability to spell correctly. And you have to make sure that you don't give away too much again. There's so many things that go into it. So I enjoyed doing Spell Bee more, and then Khelo Jeeto Jio. And I wish that it was happening again, but I was most impressed by the young children. I thought they were fabulous.
Soha, I remember putting you through your paces and trying to prepare you, and I think you were very well prepared, and I think you acquitted yourself marvelously in both, in very different ways, which had very different demands. One, of course, in Hindi, where you have to rely on your own linguistic capabilities much more, and the other one was in English, which is, like mother's milk to you, as it were. So both, and I think your attitude, the systematic way in which you prepared and you were open to things and suggestion, and how you did that, and really the way you empathetically related to contestants, that's important. I've had the opportunity or good fortune of working with such a range of talent in different languages across the country. Many of them actors who've never, ever done television and can't think of doing something which is not scripted, And you stood out, Soha. You were a very, very good student. And I think you went on way beyond that. And of course, you were, I think, terrific on Spell Bee.
But now, that means a lot coming from you. And what gave me so much confidence was having you in my ear. And I remember doing a couple of seasons when you were not in my ear. And I think that they were different.
Oh, man. Well, being that little voice in somebody's head, we try to keep it minimal. I try to keep it minimal because things go on their own. But it makes such a difference. Those prompts too have to be used very judiciously,
Yes.
So that it's not like somebody talking into your head when you're trying to speak to somebody on the phone, for instance, which is a very similar experience. You want to say, shush, move away. I don't want that.
No, I just wanted to shush you.
Anyway, you just drop in that one thing and make it happen. But yeah, I sometimes watch some of those clips from that program, and it was such a lot of fun. And you worked with the kids, and I want to talk about a little bit about quizzing and general knowledge and knowing about language, which is really the theme of this podcast, about exploring the power of knowledge. How do you think quizzing and general knowledge and reading is important and contributes to learning?
Now, especially because I'm a mother to a 7-year-old, and a lot of the children were a little bit older than that in Spell Bee. But from a young age, I can see, the importance of learning, of reading in my child's life, in Anaya's life, for example. And she goes to a very good school where they encourage student-led learning. And instead of saying read books, they just leave books lying around that are easily accessible. So, and they spend a lot of time in school reading as well. Even when it comes to writing, for a long time, she was doing best guess spelling, which as a Spell Bee host, I was like, what do you mean you can't spell like this? But they said, there's a right age to intervene and correct a child. This is not that age. This is the age to build her confidence. Let her spell however she wants to spell. So for the longest time, she used to, do inverse spelling. So big was G-I-B, and so it would be Gib. And, small was Mosh, because her brain had not processed that. Or love was spelled L-A-V, like I love you. And I'd be like, I would cringe to see it. But, someone said at some point she's going to start saying big and small, and you'll miss that. So allow her, and instead of constantly, giving her an eraser and rubbing out and correcting, there's a time to do that. And I feel like now at the age of 7, that is the time where she's now confident. She now says, oh, I would like to spell, Mama, do you know how to spell home? Home. Or, I can spell school. It's school. Can you imagine? That's how you spell school. And I was like, I know. And we're constantly challenged by the English language and spelling. Constantly. Like, I don't know how to explain to her, of all words that should be spelled with an F, phonetics should be spelled with an F, because it's phonetic, but that is spelled with a PH. So it's difficult to explain, but I see the word.
English spelling has its idiosyncrasies, and it has
Really?
crazy idiosyncrasies. But is that something, there's such a strong case for phonetic spelling, but I guess it's something that we have to get around and master, like so many other things, areas of knowledge. And that is something that people come to. But you're absolutely right. Let people figure it out for themselves up to a point, and when they need guidance, that will happen too.
Yes. And that's why I feel like, once that sense of joy of her saying, I learned this, I mastered this, I can do this, is wonderful. And I relate to that by watching the children on Spell Bee, for example, when they master something, when they know that they have sacrificed so much time that they could have spent watching television or playing with their friends or going on family trips, but they've spent that time reading the dictionary, perusing books, improving their vocabulary. All of that at a young age to become good at something, excellent at something, involves huge amounts of sacrifice. And when they see the rewards of that, even having we would tell all the contestants, the fact that you've made it to this stage at the competition is a huge achievement. There can only be one winner. But the fact that you have come to this level. My daughter does gymnastics, and that's also intense. She does it 3 times a week. And the other day she had a competition also. And, you at this age, you want to protect them. And even though you tell them, participation is what matters and it's okay if you don't get a medal, that joy of winning and excelling at something is primal. You can't fake it. So it's really nice to see young children, older children, people like us, choose a subject, specialize in it, conquer it. And, like even when you know something and you don't have to refer to Google, for example, you know the answer because of your own capabilities, your own capacity as someone who's well-read. That sense of confidence that you get is so important in so many facets of life.
I think that organic knowledge, organically grown knowledge, has a different kind of relevance and meaning, and makes all the difference. It helps you connect the dots even when you're looking at the internet, when you're looking at AI results, when you're looking at Google. That ability to have that contextual base to be able to connect the dots, I think is terribly important. And that has to come from the person, the mind that is looking at it and using it, and not rely on somebody else or something else. And I think that's terribly important. You're the mother of a 7-year-old daughter, Inaya? Is that right?
Yes.
And of course, she'll be growing, and you know what's happening with her school friends and others, and I'm sure you think about it. How do you think they can stay updated and ahead in their knowledge journey? What do you think they should do? Or what do you think their families and schools and teachers can do?
I do think that it's a comprehensive approach. The idea is to find the right school for you where you can reinforce those values and you're not fighting against each other. And if you find that happy trinity of school, family, your child, then it works well. And I think we've done that with her. We resonate with the values at school because she's in school all day from 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock. Now you can see the influences of friends that are shaping her passions, her interests. Oh my God, if I hear another Taylor Swift song, I will explode because they're all so into her whole vocabulary is because of music now, because she's listening to so much music. And it's actually, in a way, anything that you're exposed to, you can learn from. So she is learning words. Some of them are appropriate for her, some of them are not. And we have to guide and supervise and be present through this journey. But, a lot of times she said, that the other day she said she learned something about the sun and, the earth going around the sun or something. And I said, oh, that's amazing. I'm so happy they're teaching you something at school. And she said, no, I learned this from, the show that I'm watching on Netflix. I said, oh, okay. So you can also now, we have, in my time, there was that 1 hour of Chitrahar or children's appropriate entertainment that would happen. Now we have 24-hour entertainment for children. The bad side of that is that it's distracting and your child could have too much screen time. The good flip side of that is that there's really wonderful, sensitive infotainment out there for children that teaches them in a way that is better than how I could teach her. So I think watching the right content, limiting your screen time, of course, because I do think at the end of the day, there's lean forward entertainment and there's lean back entertainment, and there's a lot of leaning back and, passive entertainment that's happening. But I monitor what she's watching. She has a certain amount of limited screen time. And there's so much about, dealing with standing up to people in school when someone is daring you to do something that makes you uncomfortable, something about going to school and separation anxiety that she learns from shows that are good. Of course, what they teach in school, reading, is invaluable. So every night, our tradition is lights out at 8 o'clock, and the half an hour before that is wind down. I read to her. She now, because she can read, reads to herself, reads to me. And we definitely spend half an hour reading. No matter where we are in the world, we do that. So reading, writing, she keeps a diary, where it is a private diary. I'm not allowed to read it, but at least she's processing her emotions and she's writing down things that, that stay with her through the week. They go through so much at school and they're on their best behavior. They're the best versions of themselves from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock. So when they come home, that's not really the time for me to be educating her, teaching her, which I've realized. Now it's time for me to let her sometimes misbehave. Why is she doing that? Because finally she can be herself. Finally she can bring out her emotions that are relevant to something else that she was upset by, but she had to sort of be on her best behavior, and she can be herself and be badly behaved around me. So embrace that and feel lots of emotions, lots of feeling, understanding, hugging, being patient, but also being firm. I think that we say yes a lot. It's important to also say no at the right times. So it's constant. Like, I'm exhausted. Parenting is exhausting. By the end of the day, you have negotiated so much. You've been the best version of yourself. You have not lost your temper. You used the right words. You yourself are not eating chocolate and not watching television, so you can be the role model. And then when she goes to sleep, I just want to eat cake, watch reality TV, scream at Kunal, and do all the things that I haven't been able to do all day.
As expected, spoken like a truly thinking, caring, understanding mother who's trying to do the best by herself and for her daughter and family. Fantastic. Soha, as we wind down our podcast, we ask our guests, what's the buzz? What's next for Soha? What do you think is going to happen in our world of film and television and entertainment? What are you looking forward to, and what are you a little apprehensive about?
I am both looking forward to and apprehensive about my next project, which will be coming on one of the platforms, Amazon. And it's a horror movie. And I haven't really done a horror movie before. I'm trying to think. I've had some horrifying experiences on set, but this is a horror movie and I am playing the antagonist. Okay. So when they came to me and they said, there's this role and you're the boo factor. And I said, really? And they said, yes, we think that, people will see a different side to you. And the only people who really were pro this were my daughter and my husband, who said, we can completely see this. You could do this. It will come to you very naturally. So there's a movie called Chori 2. They've already done Chori 1. And it's interesting because they look at the various social evils that women face at different stages of their lives in India, from infanticide to, dowry deaths and widow burning in Sati and the practices. So this is Chori 2. I think it'll be releasing hopefully early next year on Amazon. After which I've done a movie with my Rang De Basanti co-actor, Madhavan. So Madhavan and I have done a film together, and Rashi Khanna. And it's a thriller, which is my favorite genre of film. That I think is it's intended to be a theatrical release. So after a long time, I spent last year acting and stepping away from parenting. And I found it's actually very relaxing to spend all day on set, just doing one thing, as opposed to coming home, running a home, managing your child, looking after your husband, being a good wife, being a good mother, being a good daughter. There are so many things that you have to do in normal life. If you forget it all and you go away and you do a movie, it's actually very relaxing.
I know. One of your remarks, I think, is, when if you go to do acting, now luckily all the films and roles that you mentioned involve a fair amount of performance. But as you said, what actors have to do a lot of the time is basically learn to wait for their shot and their opportunity. And, when they get on, because that's what happens on sets a lot of the time. You wait. You wait for the technical rig up, you wait for the other actors, you wait for all sorts of things. But all of these sound nice, meaty and interesting roles to do, and fantastic to hear of everything that you're doing there.
Fingers crossed. But yes, I managed to get a lot of reading done after a long time while I was waiting.
Soha, before we end, a few quick questions to lighten things up. Best advice you've ever received?
It's not very woke advice, but my mother said, always don't offend a man's ego and don't offend a woman's emotions. And I felt that, it stood me in good stead.
Your advice to wannabe actors and actresses?
Make sure there's a signed contract, firstly, before you quit your day job, and hang in there. You need to have thick skin. You can't make everyone happy. So, don't read all the comments on Instagram, for example. And really, I think self-love is required, but hang in there.
How does one keep one's child grounded as a star child?
I don't know. I had parents who did that for me. And again, the schools that I went to, the educational institutes that I went to, where I had to hide my Nokia phone from people because there was inverse snobbery at Oxford. So I think that it's very important to, again, as a historian, that I just understood perspective. You're here, you're a little blip in this world, in a huge world. You're not the center of the world. The center of the world is just very hot mantle. You're on the surface of something. So the idea is to just realize, go and stand in front of the Grand Canyon, go and stand in front of, a natural wonder. Take a holiday, step out of your comfort zone, and then I think everybody will realize we're really actually very insignificant in the greater scheme of things.
And that's something that you would tell Inaya too?
Absolutely. Really, I don't want to leave any kind of legacy. I don't want to be remembered. I want to make an impact on the people who I live with and who I love while I'm around. But I have no expectation of the people that I don't know remembering me or, leaving my imprint. I think as it is, as human beings, we damage the planet on a daily basis. So the idea is not to leave footprints. The idea is to live, try not to ruffle too many feathers and quietly go away. And for me, loving, spending time with people who are close to you and just try to unlock their potential, happiness. Like my father said, my father, I remember one of his interviews said that surely the goal in life is to be happy. For some people, chasing the dream actually makes them happy. Ambition drives them, and that process makes them happy. For some people, they don't need that maybe. They're just laid back more naturally. And that makes them happy. But the idea is to identify what makes you happy and then to live that.
Do you remember a favorite word from Spelby or any one word which was memorable? You mentioned lung disease one. Anything else?
There's my favorite word, and there's the word that I felt very heartbroken at. So when, I think it was at the finals, and there was a girl, and her word to spell was fajita, and I'd say, the clues, and they're supposed to ask for the clues. I can't volunteer the clues. So I said, your word to spell is fajita. And she said, oh, so easy, F-A-J-I-T-A. And I said, oh, you should have asked me to use it in a sentence, because then I would have indicated that it's plural. So there's a silent S, F-A-G-I-T-A-S. And we couldn't, and I think she lost because of that. And it was very heartbreaking, because she obviously could have spelled fajitas with an S as well. The word that I love, what are the words that I love?
Heartbreaking. Yeah.
Very heartbreaking. But I love these onomatopoeic words, like words that sound like kerfuffle is one of my favorite words, because it's just, it's a lot of fun to say, and it's fun to spell.
And expresses ease of action, so it's very expressive.
Like, yeah,
Absolutely.
it's a kerfuffle. Like chaos and ruffle.
Yes, quite right, kerfuffle. So if you could create a quiz show for today's Gen Alpha or even Gen Z, what would it be called?
Oh God, I don't even speak their language. Do you know the kinds of words they are using? I don't even understand. Like, things that were positive are now negative. And they have words like lit and
Sick.
lo pato done. But like sick used to be bad and now it's good. And the other day, there was a Instagram video of my brother. And they said, Riz. So Riz is like, I don't know, charisma or something? Or
Yes,
I don't know.
yes. It's a short form of charisma. Yeah.
So I think it should be Riz quiz.
Sounds very good. Rhymes too. It has a great buzz about it. Yes, very nice. Yeah.
Copyright it immediately.
Do that. Last question in this little section. Your favorite activity during your me time?
I really enjoy playing badminton, and I really enjoy having long massages. And I like to play badminton followed by a long massage. I really value my alone time, because I don't get it very much. And I love my own company. So I would say vigorous badminton followed by a long massage.
Anyway, I certainly enjoyed this conversation with you. So it was not me time. It was our time, and a whole lot of people watching and listening to the show, I think, would enjoy it very much too. You've really given us lots to think about, to embrace learning with humor and curiosity. Thanks for sharing your journey and your insights, and from your academic achievements to creative ventures. You've shown us a very individual way to live your life, like Frank Sinatra sang, my way. Before I wind up, any last words for the people listening?
No, I think, the idea is, even though I've had this fantastic formal education, my mother, for example, who never went to university, is one of the most intelligent, wise people that I know. So whatever your path is in life, the idea is to constantly keep an open mind. My father was not the first one to say it, but if you keep talking, you won't learn. But if you listen to anybody, you will always be able to learn something from everyone. So absorb, be curious, ask questions. In my daughter's school, in her room, there's something called the Wonder Wall. So whenever you have a question, little kids from the age of 5 put it up on the Wonder Wall. Why is the sky blue? Why can't I eat chocolate every minute of the day? All those questions. So the idea, I think all of us should have a Wonder Wall and constantly ask questions and keep an open mind.
So I certainly enjoyed that chat with you. It was great fun with lots of food for thought. To all the viewers and listeners, stay curious and listen well. Like Sohas said, keep asking questions. Keep your wonder wall going, because the journey of knowledge is an endless adventure. See you all next time on Quizzy Talk. Don't forget to comment, like and subscribe. Bye for now.